Hello, hello all, and hello from Luther. This is Anna Reads, and we are picking right back up with chapter 11 of Unmentionable, the Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Therese O'Neill. Let's get started, shall we? Let's see, we were past Comstock, we were past Alcott, we were past dyspepsia. Here we are. Adjusting. Page 215, chapter 11. Running a proper household, the Gentle Art of Dictatorship. Oh my God, Luther! Ugh. Kitty gas. Ugh. Without other compelling distractions, the wealthy and educated have spent a great deal of time thinking up rules. Instincts are no longer to be trusted, and the simplest way is by no means the best anymore. Even something as straightforward as inviting a guest to come inside your home is a heady undertaking fraught with potential faux pas. You cannot simply say, "Come in, have a seat." A guest will be lost with a command as vague as that. What seat? What room? May the guest enter unaccompanied, or is it the current fashion that she shall bring an elderly Albanian man as an escort? The Albanian, shall he use a simple brass filigreed walking stick, or does the season call for a bamboo cane? A good hostess leaves no room for confusion. Let's see. Page 217, heading, The Honor Corner and the Distant Seat of Manliness. Tonight, darling, is the night you prove your worth as a wife, nay, a woman, to all the people whose opinion matter. Family and friends? No, chérie. You will pay attention. I swear I would rap your fine knuckles with my fan if you were before me. You're a woman of Victorian society, and your singular goal is to increase your standing in that society. It's not just about snootiness either. There is cat hair stuck to my lipstick. I don't know how I can possibly read to you about snootiness with cat hair stuck to my lipstick. You do this for your family's well-being. Pleasing and befriending the wives of his superiors will elevate your husband in his career, as well as for your children, whose futures rest on recommendations from the right people and good marriage matches. Your guests are arriving. Now go stand in an attitude of grace and hospitality mixed with a reserved, regal bearing and wait in the hall. Get your expression set straight. You're pleased to see them, but not excited. Smile smaller. No teeth, you little badger. Smaller. There. In the interest of time, we will restrict ourselves to the rules of attending to guests as explained by a single author, unnamed, writing in 1840 in the book Etiquette for Ladies, with hints on the preservation, improvement, and display of the female beauty. But be aware, there were as many versions of the following danse macabre as there are stars in the sky. First of all, your visitor shall be invited into the drawing room, not the parlor. I am sure there is a difference, though what it is presently escapes me. I actually know this information. A parlor was the front room of a home, and it had some macabre connotations in that people normally died in the home, and when they did that, their laying out and funerals and visitations, all that good stuff was held in the parlor. It was normally a front room that had a lot of windows, so you had ice upon the corpse to keep it cold, and you opened all the windows so that when nature began to take its course, grandmama didn't, reek. So a parlor had definite funerary connotations, whereas a drawing room or just simply front room might not. Unless you are too poor to afford a drawing room, in which case the parlor must do. Again, that was not something you wanted to do because of the connotations associated with home funerals. In which case you probably don't need unless you are too poor to afford a parlor, in which case you probably don't need a book of this nature. Wouldn't your pennies be better spent procuring butcher's scraps to fortify your pottage? But if you insist, you may receive the guest in the dining room, which otherwise is to be avoided. And if your financial means only allows you to crowd your guests into your dining area, please behave in a manner appropriate to your glaring poverty. Don't throw lavish affairs that will embarrass everyone because they suspect you must be sending your 7-year-old out to work as a chimney sweep in order to pay for them. Now, positioning the guests. A young man, offer him an armchair or a stuffed chair. An elderly man, insist he take the armchair. A lady, beg her to be seated on the sofa. More than one lady, give the nicest chair to the most important one. This might be the eldest, but not in every case. Wealth, social position, and general mastery of feminine warfare also qualify. In winter, place the nicest chair at the corner of the fireplace. This is considered the most honorable seat in the house. The farther you are from the fireplace, the lower your social rank. A married lady in winter, take her by the hand and conduct her to the corner of the fireplace. If a gentleman is host, you seat guests, then place a chair at a distance from the guests. The gentleman who is the host sits there. This is either to avoid intimidating those who trespass on your generosity or to increase intimidation. If a lady is hostess to an intimate friend, she may sit next to her on the sofa, which is where you will remember a lady is to be sat unless she is married, because then she must go to the corner of honor. If a lady is hostess to multiple ladies, she will form a horseshoe of furniture and take a chair at the center of it. Now that one actually makes sense. I'm actually a former member of the National League of Junior Cotillions, and I happen to be hearing impaired. So horseshoe, hostess at the center, that actually does make really good sense for, what's the word? The word starts with an F, I can't remember it. Fostering conversation, really, helping that conversation along if you're in a horseshoe and everyone can see each other's faces and hear each other. And here we have a joke. If you roll 5 of a kind, this is considered Yahtzee, and you may demand the corner of honor, whether it be winter or summer, unless the chair has arms and is stuffed, then you lose a turn. As you can see, even this very small piece of domestic life is an absolute spider's web of propriety. You can either be the one who deftly creates it, like the deadly Atrax robustus, spinning her swirling vortex of terrifying delicacy, or you can be one of the small hapless frogs that stumble into it, your clumsy vibrations heralding your doom. Yes, that's Black Widow. Thank you, Natasha. We can't possibly cover every aspect of keeping a worthy Victorian home for reasons you'll discover later. But we can touch on some of the interactions you'll be expected to navigate, particularly involving the many non-family people who will be in your home. Page 220, heading, Helping servants remember they are appreciated. Pieces of furniture. At this moment, I would like to give a grand shout out to everyone during the current pandemic conditions who are considered essential and are continuing to go to work during this time. We're all trying to practice social distancing, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing what you do. Good news. As we have decided you are wealthy, because you sure as cesspits don't want to be anywhere near this century if you are not. There is a great deal of work in your household that you don't actually have to do. You have domestics. In this era, even a middle-class family would employ at least one maid-of-all-work to keep a household running, and if finances allowed, a cook, since cooking anything beyond porridge and stews was an all-day affair. Then, depending on the size of your home and estate, your next acquisition would likely be a man-of-all-work to do handyman deeds, for at this point the man of the house must be putting in very long hours on his job or mistress and heavy lifting. Servants like these did not indicate ridiculous wealth. Even with a cook and a maid, the average woman's day would still be filled with a degree and kind of labor that even the most high-performing woman of today would find unbearably vexatious. A good 19th century housewife was a dedicated and hard-working micromanager. I bring your attention back to the line in If I Were a Rich Man in Fiddler on the Roof. I see my wife, my Goldie, looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin, supervising meals to her heart's delight. I see her putting on airs and strutting like a peacock only when a happy mood she's in, screaming at the servants day and night. Besides supervising the care and education of her children, public schools were neither universally available nor compulsory in America until the 20th century. She had a complicated household economy to oversee. Everything we get at the grocery store had to be purchased from separate vendors on separate accounts. She had to stay in communication with the dairy, the butcher, the dry goods store, and the grocery, where fresh fruit and vegetables were purchased. Then there were the clothing and household items that she likely had to make and maintain by herself for her family. For a middle-class family, if a seamstress or tailor was employed, it would be for a single best dress or suit of clothing. For the vast majority of the families that employed them, servants did the broad, heavy work, things we seldom do today at all. The maid might scrub the floor and sweep the ashes out of the fireplace, thank heavens, but that simply freed up the wife to get down on her knees and spot clean the upholstery on the parlor furniture with a special cleansing concoction her own mother taught her. That said, even the kindest mistress was a mistress, not a friend and not an equal to her servants. And if she was an unkind mistress, she would work extra diligently to make sure the servants were constantly aware of their inferiority, as we shall see. For wealthy families like yours, yes, you're welcome, household labor was apportioned much more precisely. Here's where we have The Secret Garden, Downton Abbey, the works you're familiar with. Scullery maids, housemaids, under-housemaids, laundry maids, chef, cook, confectioner, pastry cook, steward's boy, valet groom, and hall usher. The procession of help was endless. And no, the mistress of the house did not spot clean her own upholstery. She would have the chair sent out to its designer for repair. The mistress would not even have to balance her own accounts. That's what a trusted housekeeper, the highest female position in a grand house, Mistress Medlock in The Secret Garden, for example, did. Often there would be less struggle between master and servant in the larger houses. The servants would likely be paid more and have more fellow workers to help shoulder the workload. Plus, there was pride in being employed by a large estate. Some of the servants these folks kept were just ridiculous. What does a hall usher even do? But most were truly required to keep large houses and important people functioning. As fey and snooty as it all seems to us, social events were quite important then, one of the few opportunities people had to interact and judge one another's characters. If a man wanted to advance in the world, he truly did need, to a certain extent, we all know that, his wife at his side at parties, well turned out and charming to show prospective business and social contacts that he was a man of good taste and comfortable means. A wife couldn't play the role of impressive ornament for him if she was busy cooking and cleaning for a crowd. We still have domestic help in the 21st century. It's not unheard of for even middle-class families to have a Manuel. He does such a great job with the roses. I'd be living in a hollowed-out briar patch without that guy. Or Katya, she cooks and she comes and helps clean the house out every 2 weeks. We'd die without her. The wealthy add nannies, tutors, personal fitness coaches, but were much less likely to acknowledge any difference in class between helper and helped, at least overtly. Class delineation makes us uncomfortable. We have a core belief in our time that any honest worker is worthy of respect, usually more than those who have inherited wealth. That's a very new thing and very American. The 19th century marked the beginning of the end of the immemorial belief that one person could be superior to another simply by virtue of their bloodline. If William the Conqueror bequeathed a huge chunk of land to a favored knight, who himself could not have attained the rank of knight without money backing him, for the next 900 years that knight's descendants would live without laboring, collecting large dividends and rents from the peasants who paid them to use and inhabit that estate. The wars of the 20th century would bleed England and other European powers white, cut off their empires, and demand wealth redistribution that would make even the most liberal American blanch. But that hasn't happened yet. You in the 19th century are witness to the fading but still glorious sunset of domestic servitude. In America, things were messier, particularly in the South, where instead of domestic servants, people had house slaves who were either already holding or on the way to holding the highest rank available to them. Being of personal service to his or her owner was as far away from the unspeakable misery of the fields as a slave could hope to be. Sometimes, due to the length of time master and slave had known each other and the intimacy in which they lived, the relationship bordered on familial, but in a sickly, degrading way. I presume that, however beguiling the grandeur of Scarlett O'Hara's Technicolor world seems to you, however happy the... Oh my God, I have to take my glasses off to read this one. However happy the well-fed, shiny-faced mammy seems in devoting her life to helping her ungrateful owners thrive, the slave-holding South is one place you don't want to visit. So we will leave it in history where it belongs. That was possibly the most sensitive way we could have handled that, isn't it? In the American North, 19th century maids and footmen didn't have to fear being sold away from their children or beaten for being slow. Plus, they were actual free Americans in a culture that never was and never would be entirely comfortable with unyielding servitude. Unlike in England, where being a servant was a lifelong profession, American servants were always ready for something better to come along, be it marriage or a chance to work in their cousin's store. So securing good service from them could be a chore. In fact, servants and those who thought they deserved round-the-clock service, a privilege usually only afforded to babies, the enfeebled, and people who rule nations and occasionally sign execution orders, clashed all the time. Therefore, a proper 19th century mistress treats her servants with firm benevolence. However, according to Etiquette for Ladies, you must never allow them to appear in your presence looking too slatternly or too finely dressed. A servant who is too finely dressed must be dangerously close to considering herself just as human as her mistress. Allow them to answer you by signs or coarse terms. Signs include nodding. Coarse terms would be using the word yes without miss or ma'am here in the South following it. To this day in the American South, you will hear the conversation between parent and child that goes, "Did you hear me? Yes? Yes what? Yes, ma'am?" It would have made The Walking Dead a heck of a lot more believable Carl, and Rick. Allow them to enter into conversation with each other in your presence. Or scold your servants. They are not children. Children get second chances. No, it is preferable to turn them away at once. There will always be another girl waiting on the back stoop who prefers grueling labor and being treated like furniture to a life of starvation or prostitution, sex work. As for dismissing servants, unless they do something very bad, you have to give them notice, usually a month. A month. During which time they may try to procure a new place. A new place, especially in the same field of work, is near impossible to find without references, that is, at least one letter from a previous employer vouching for a servant's honesty and ability. Thomas Hill, a prolific and respected writer of guidebooks on everything from thanking a railway conductor to hello you, thanking a railway conductor to writing succinct and tasteful tombstone inscriptions, is that his work outside the Haunted Mansion? Offers an example in one of his etiquette books of how to end a woman's career, possibly her ability to support herself. Note the name of the servant. It's those Irish thugs again. Mrs. Ballard, in reply to your note of enquiry, I decline to recommend Bridget Mallory. She is both dishonest and addicted to intemperance. Even worse is to be dismissed summarily or immediately for one of the following infractions detailed in 1873's Cassell's Household Guide, Volume 1, block quote. When a domestic servant is guilty of immoral conduct, willfully refuses to obey orders, gets intoxicated, stays out all night without being able to give a satisfactory reason for so doing, or habitually neglects to carry out his or her master's or mistress's lawful commands, such domestic servant may be summarily dismissed without any more wages being paid than are actually due. You know, that sounds exactly like the at-will labor we have right now, but moving on to the rest of the block quote. Of course, in cases of detected theft, master or mistress has the right to cause the servants' rooms and boxes to be examined. You may be a 45-year-old woman, but if you live under my Queen Anne off-center dormers protruding fashionably from a steeply gabled roof, you live by my rules. Wow, that sounds a lot like at-will employment. A servant is basically like a teenager with endless chores, except that teenagers usually have car privilege, and even if such a thing existed, no lower-class Victorian housemaid would even be allowed to polish the chrome, because she'd probably rip it right off and sell it to indulge in whiskey and games of chance. All hail the washing machine, off-the-rack clothes, faster transportation of goods, electric appliances, and every other time-saving device that will flood the markets of the early 20th century, setting those who wish it free of the two-way tyranny of servitude. But we are not there yet. You still must use all your finesse to keep your domestics working well without letting them feel as if they could do any better. Wow, that sounds so much like at-will employment. Most of all, no matter what hour of this fading dusk of service you live in, be wary of how you treat servants in front of distinguished company. Nothing so declares a woman of low class than her needing to make an effort to appear superior to servants. Take it from John A. Ruth and S. L. Lewis, the authors of 1882's Decorum, a practical treatise on etiquette and dress of the best American society. Block quote. If you ask the waiter for anything, you will be careful to speak to him gently in the tone of request and not of command. To speak to a waiter in a driving manner will create, among well-bred people, the suspicion that you were sometime a servant yourself and are putting on airs at the thought of your promotion. Be nice to waitstaff. You weren't raised by wild animals. Be nice to waitstaff. Having servants really could be quite a headache, dear, though you would not know it from the stories you've most enjoyed. But the unsurprising fact is, people preferred servitude only to starving or freezing to death. That was it. And if that's all you're offering, you can't expect much in return. This is, you get what you pay for. 228, heading, dinner, the final reckoning. Headache or not, the pinnacle of 19th century domestic society is the dinner party, and it cannot be done without servants. It can't be done without a lot of things, actually, but here is one thing you can do away with right now, even before we select the menu: practicality. In the 21st century, even the starchiest of homes usually enforced only the most basic table manners. I used to work in a Chili's, and I can tell you, even those basics are going out of the window. With the exception of the arbitrary elbows off the table edict, those manners were common sense interpretations of don't be gross and share. Again, if you've ever been to a Chili's. But the 19th century is different. It is a time of ceremony and romance, two things that seldom occupy the same space as common sense. I do not know what it feels like, after years of study and observation, to suddenly be thrust for the first time into the middle of an inner-city emergency room where lives hang on your ability to remember the procedures you've learned. But I'm almost certain it wouldn't be as complicated or nerve-wracking as your first formal 19th century dinner. I'm sure there's a degree of hyperbole there, given that I have friends who are nurses, but we'll just roll with that hyperbole and move right along. Breakfast, tea, and luncheon all have their own rules. And do please remember, only a leather-skinned fishwife refers to luncheon as dinner or dinner as supper. But dinner is the ultimate test of your domestic etiquette, so we will focus on it. She doesn't make any mention of second breakfast or elevensies, so I don't know where she's going with this. Your guests should be assembled in your most guestly room at the correct time, see above, and you with them. Their number should be, as the adage of the day goes, more than the Graces, which is 3, and less than the Muses, which is 9. Really though, guests numbering up to 12 are acceptable. 13 are not. We know that 13 is not a wicked number, but it is still widely believed that if you eat 13 to a meal, one of the company will die within the year. Of course, it is a superstition, but at this point so is sterilizing wounds with alcohol. You can't pick and choose. Speaking of, this is just cranberry juice. A domestic shall announce the serving of dinner, and not scrubby little Colleen from the kitchen with her insipid Irish sputter. Oh, pish, that's not racist, it's factual. No one likes the Irish in this century, brutish sots. Their time will come. We'll get all gooey for them for most of the 20th century and beyond. But for now, your English, if possible, butler, at his most rigid, is preferred for this task. Think Cogsworth. Just think Cogsworth and keep yourself from going screaming into the night. Seating arrangements are to have been set out beforehand. You are to have planned this seating with no less attention than you would give to an international summit between warring nations, which is quite likely what you're doing on a small scale. Mrs. Pettibone next to Miss Whip. Do not think that just because 2 years have passed that Miss Whip has forgotten Mrs. Pettibone's withering jabs about the neckline of her summer gown at the Clydes Park Promenade. And Mrs. Pettibone is not going to apologize. She feels she did Miss Whip a service to keep her from further embarrassing herself. And if you want to know why Miss Whip is entering her 4th social season and still no marriage proposals, just ask Mrs. Oh, just put them far away from each other, dear. Also, remember to avoid seating together 2 people who like each other a great deal, or even 2 people who share an occupation. Remember your wicked, wicked teacher's aide who went out of her way to separate anyone that she knew even remarkably tolerated each other in grade school? That's what you've got going here. Because they might talk to each other, separate from the whole party, and about things they find interesting. And if everyone else has to spend 3 hours discussing floral displays at the city park and which Swiss finishing school does the best job of sterilizing a daughter into scalding purity, so do they. As host, offer second helpings of every course. As a guest, never, ever accept this invitation. The preparation, presentation, and consumption of this meal are as carefully timed as a space shuttle launch. Your deciding you simply must have another go at those asparagus spears can derail the whole process. The properly set table varies in this century depending on the etiquette book you read, but at the height of the Victorian period, the finest of table settings will provide at least 4 forks, 2 knives, and 1 spoon, and 3 plates, and 4 glasses. A similar version is described by Robert Tomes in the Bazaar Book of Decorum. Before we get to the block quote, here's a picture. There's the table setting. It is absolutely as ridiculous as you think. The caption there is reproduction of a full Victorian dinner service. Many of these utensils were used only for serving. Choose wisely. Can I help you? Oh, for heaven's sake, there's another cat back there. Luther. Block quote. To the right of the soup plate will be 4 glasses, tumbler first, the Madeira, then the claret, and finally the champagne glass. 2 large knives and forks are placed with the knives on the right and the forks on the left of each guest, and when the dessert is to be eaten, a silver knife and fork and spoon are served upon the small plate with the finger bowl and doily. The guest, on receiving these, spreads his doily on his left. Can you 2 idiots not? Deposits the finger bowl upon it and noiselessly sets his knife on the right and his fork and spoon on the left. Are you taking notes? 232 heading, Mrs. Beeton's Bill of Fare. The table is set. Now what will you serve? Let's ask Mrs. Isabella Beeton, authoress of the exhaustive and best-selling 1861 Beeton's Book of Household Management. Here we have a picture of Mrs. Beeton shortly before her death. A handsome woman, I would say. Beeton was the industrious young wife of a magazine publisher, eldest of 21 children, and not a particular expert in any of the many subjects she advised upon, which ranged from how to pick the tastiest breed of sheep straight from the field to the art of administering a turpentine enema. Please don't do that. Please never do that. Her authoritative tone and the sheer volume of her words disguised her inexperience. She wrote household management in her early 20s, borrowing liberally, plagiarizing, but nobody really cared, from many other cookbooks and etiquette books. Sadly, Beeton did not live to see the long-lasting success of her work. After suffering many miscarriages and losing 2 of her 4 children in infancy, she died of childbirth, puerperal fever at age 28. Her biographers believe her husband's syphilis might have been a factor in her miscarriages and death. Her work remains one of the clearest windows into ideal Victorian culture, evidenced in the following Bill of Fare, given as an example of a proper October dinner for 12 persons. Oh, one last thing before service. Never allow your waiters to serve from the right. A person of good breeding will not have been allowed to achieve maturity with the sinister hand dominant, or as we say today, left-handed. India ink dripping from the nib of a pen did not dry fast enough to prevent a trailing left hand from making every epistle a smear. Therefore, it is far more convenient for all guests to serve themselves from the proffered dishes if they are reaching to the left with their stronger right hand. And they do serve themselves. This isn't a military mess hall where a sweaty man ladles. I think this is a typo. No. This isn't a military mess hall where sweaty men slap ladles of pungent mush on your plate. No, your pungent mush will be offered delicately by trained servants wielding precise mush-serving utensils. The first course, the soup. Soup à la cresse. That's carrot soup, but I don't do French very well. Or soupe à la reine. Never decline the soup, even if you don't plan to eat it. You'll look pathetic being the only one with an empty plate, and that makes people uncomfortable. See fish. Baked cod, stewed eels. The fish course may be declined. Use a fish fork unless the host is too poor to have fish forks. Then just use one of the other 4 forks you ought to have been provided. No, not that one. No, that one is specifically for oysters, which really, chérie, is something any adolescent schoolboy would know. Try the small one toward the outside of the line. Incidentally, most fancy dish settings today, you're reasonably safe if you start at the outside and work your way in course-wise. The hors d'oeuvres, such as olives, radishes, or anchovy salads. Oh yes, they are so viable a salad base. Salad has taken on a very narrow meaning during your lifetime, one that you must now expand. Eat your pickled stinkfish. And you have the entrees course now. Riz de veau and tomato sauce, pork cutlets and sauce Robert, vol au vent of chicken and grilled mushrooms. These are also called the side dishes, and you must use only your fork to eat them, probably the bigger one. Alright, I honestly don't know which one, but it's possible that no one actually does. If anyone questions you, say you picked up the habit of using this particular fork during your time at the Sorbonne and have had trouble shaking it. Again, you're probably safe starting at the outside and working your way in. Also, don't keep your knife clutched like a dagger in your hand as you eat. It looks utterly primitive. If you must cut a hard substance into biteable size, do so in small portions and then retire the knife. That rule actually upholds to this day, for those of you who are concerned. The second course, rump of beef à la jardinière, roast goose, boiled fowls in celery sauce, tongue that has been garnished, vegetables. This is the heaviest meat and vegetable course. As livestock farming hasn't reached the astounding production we're familiar with today, be prepared for more birds, fish, small game, and tongue pieces than you're used to. If your favorite bit of the garnished tongue happens to be the esophagus end, it is impolite to request it. This probably won't be an issue. Regarding vegetables, they will be boiled. Like someone filled a silicone carrot mold of a fake carrot with Gerber vegetable mush. Eat them and be glad that the process of destroying this perfectly good vegetable probably killed a great deal of parasites. I bring to you the throwaway line in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Food's a lot better, we used to boil everything. The next line is, no polio, that's good. Can we just talk for a second about how sad that is? I'll let that sink in for a second. I did not mean to drink that so judgingly, I promise. Third course, grouse, pheasants, quince jelly, lemon cream, apple tart, compote of peaches, nesselrode pudding, cabinet pudding, scalloped oysters. This course provides an array of sweet dishes, hot pudding, and slow-moving birds. That actually, to me, doesn't sound all that bad, and if I could find a modern version, like Alton Brown's version, I might actually do a cooking video, but you don't want to see that, I promise. Dessert and ices course. Mrs. Beeton doesn't specify the dessert menu to complement this particular meal, but desserts in this century commonly consist of cheeses, fruit, cakes, sweetmeats or nuts, and sorbet-like ices. Coffee and liqueur usually follow. As with all courses, never hesitate to take the last piece or serving of any dessert if offered. Declining such an offer, which you might consider a polite gesture, is actually a declaration to your host that you noticed he has no official drawing room and is probably too poor to spare the food. At this point, you might be wishing you'd time traveled to ancient Rome, where feasts were just as varied and ample, but a good host would provide long feathers to help his guests vomit when they were too full, that they might continue merrymaking. Victorians are seldom so practical. It is a long-held tradition that after the meal has concluded, the sexes separate. The ladies go to the withdrawing room, or as we know it, the drawing room, so that they may gossip and twaddle while the men smoke foul tobacco, pour heavy liquors, and tell lascivious stories about French women. However, there are many homes in this health-minded era where men of breeding getting sloppy drunk is frowned upon. So the sexes often retire together, as women of equally good breeding have the ability to suck all the masculinity and merriment out of an occasion. After an hour of stiff socializing, your guests will finally take their gracious leave. 236 heading, Pairing pairs for pairs. The rules set forth in this chapter may seem entirely arbitrary and largely lacking the soul of politeness, which is simply to show kindness to those around you. The uncompromising seating arrangement that allows the richest guest the nicest chair does not seem to be the best way to keep joy and gentleness flowing at a party. Honestly, I believe these rules were a sort of test. Throughout history, a man's whole wealth, future, and lifestyle, and that of his ancestors, could be known at a glance. There were even laws in some parts of Europe that forbade common people from dressing as nicely as the nobility. But the innovations, wars, and social upheavals of the late 18th and 19th centuries changed all that. Suddenly, the orphan son of a prostitute could grow up to own steel empires, while a seventh-generation duke could find himself penniless because he had no idea how to use his land beyond allowing peasants to work it for him. So people made rules. Hard, insidious little rules which you could really only learn through a lifetime of observation and practice. That way, the Duke was still a gentleman, but the steel baron would show himself to be one of the upstarts, the rough and tactless nouveau riche. You actually hear Charles Winchester in MASH talk about that. Therefore, these rules are important. The rules are righteous. Everyone needs to play by these rules. You can almost hear the gritted teeth through which the authors Ruth and Lewis allow that Queen Victoria herself has strayed from them. The caption on the picture itself is Her Majesty's gracious smile. The caption below the picture is Her Majesty will eat her bread with a rusty garden trowel if she so chooses, thereby making the practice Victorian, so suck it. The present Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth has a similar smile, if I may observe. Queen Victoria has set the fashion of placing the whole loaf of bread upon the table with a knife by its side, leaving the bread to be cut as it is desired. However, the old style of having the bread already cut when it is placed upon the table will still recommend itself to many. One mustn't suggest Her Royal Highness is indulging in a boorish abuse of simple, sacred etiquette, even if she is. Just think of the crumbs that will fall as each piece is whacked and sawed off by people entirely too refined to ever have been trained in the lower arts like barrel making or bread slicing. I fear I simply cannot supply you with all the information you will need to properly run a socially keen home. There is just too much. Still, let me leave you with some choice hints from Messrs. Ruth and Lewis. Never pare an apple or a pear for a lady unless she desire you. Ouch! And then be careful to use your fork to hold it. You may sometimes offer to divide a very large pear with or for a person. Kind of makes sense. Cheese must be eaten with a fork. Never lay your hand or play with your fingers upon the table. Neither toy with your knife, fork, or spoon. Make pills of your bread, nor draw imaginary lines upon the tablecloth. What were these people doing? Never bite fruit. An apple, pear, or peach should be peeled with a silver knife, and all fruit should be broken or cut. My own grandmother adhered to that one. You'd never bite into a whole fruit. Never bite fruit. That's what we're dealing with. Here inside your own home, my gosling. No, you can't lock yourself up in the attic and become a mad poet. You're here, and you simply must participate in the excruciating minutiae of proper housekeeping. But social interaction inside your home only requires some of your skills. Now we will test the rest. We shall go outside. And this one is from Harper's May. Socializing is mandatory. After all, there are crazy cat ladies in every century, and you don't want to be counted among them. Look at the long blobs. That has been Chapter 11 of Unmentionable, the Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Therese O'Neill, and this has been Anna Reads. If you have something that you're interested in hearing me read, feel free to contact me, and I will graciously entertain your suggestions. Instagram, at serenity_sweet13. On Twitter, at serenitysweet13, no underscore. If you came to my YouTube channel via Facebook, you are welcome to contact me on Facebook, or you can direct message or comment right here on YouTube. Remember to subscribe. Have a wonderful day, and again, we're in pandemic conditions, and we're all here to take care of each other. So whatever you can do to just be a little kinder to somebody today, please do it. I love y'all. Have a good one.